time constrained on this, is the Waka Kotahi update. You will realise by now that certainly what Councillor Fletcher and I have been endeavouring to do is to get a good understanding of all the NZTA projects that are getting in many cases finished or well progressed, and there are quite a number of very substantive investments that are occurring that Steve has been methodically updating us on. We really appreciate that. Today it is moving to the southern part of the Auckland region, where there's some pretty substantive work going on in that corridor from Papakura through to Drury. So we are very much looking forward to hear Steve as to what's happening out there. I believe Randia is in attendance with you. But without any further ado, because I know you've got to be away by 12:30, Steve, we'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and tēnā koutou, and thanks for pushing the agenda along. Randy and I could squeeze to 12:45 just to make sure that there's plenty of time for any questions that the councillors may have. Look, just first of all, before we start, I just want to acknowledge our police partners for their incredible bravery this morning. They certainly have a tough job, and it's we just need to acknowledge our partners there. But this is an information paper, and it's to advise you of all the really good work that's actually underway in South Auckland under the government's New Zealand Upgrade Program. But also we just want to touch on the Northwest Rapid Transit project, which is moving at pace as well. So that's the second part of the presentation this morning. If we just move to the next page, please. So the aim of the New Zealand Upgrade Program, it's actually the government's $8.7 billion multimodal investment in transport, which was to stimulate the economy after COVID. And they wanted to do that by providing some better travel options for growing communities, help people to get to where they're going safely, and provide more reliable connections for new housing areas and businesses and freight. So in total, the New Zealand Upgrade Program in itself encompasses 37 projects, and there's 20 major projects in New Zealand's main growth areas. And in Auckland, the South Auckland package is a key component of that upgrade program. Next slide, please. So with the Waka Kotahi projects in South Auckland, the NZ funded projects are the State Highway 22 Drury upgrade, the Waihoihui Road upgrade, the Manukau to Takaanini Access and Safety project, and also the State Highway 1 Papakura to Drury, which is currently in delivery, and you'll see that construction on the Southern Motorway at the moment. So I'll just talk briefly about each one of these slides shortly. We've just moved to the next slide, please. So Waka Kotahi is continuing to work on the business case for the South Auckland package. So there's no construction funding as yet. And the business case will be presented to the Joint Ministers of Transport and Finance for consideration in August. However, there are some existing designations on the corridors which have been developed by Te Tapu Ngātahi Supporting Growth Alliance and have been confirmed by Council. So the government provided us through the NZ funding some pre-implementation funding for the State Highway 22 Drury project and also the Waihoihui Road projects. So what that did is brought forward the timeline for these projects to align with the Kiwi Rail station delivery and the planned housing development in the south. Now, the construction work for those two projects could start in early 2025 if the projects receive that construction funding, which is subject to the government's final approval of the business case. So next slide, please. So State Highway 22 Drury upgrade project, the key features of this project is to get access to the planned Drury West housing development area and the Ngākorua railway station. And we're looking at, on that orange section there that you can see on the slide, there's an increased number of lanes from 2 to 4 to cater for the growth. There's signalised intersections on State Highway 2 at Jesmond Road and at Great South Road. There's walking and bike paths separated from vehicles. And the new Ngākorua Stream Bridge, including additional lanes to better connect the Drury interchange upgrade. And that bridge height is actually being raised to make it more resilient to flooding and future climate change effects. The next slide, please. The Waihoihui Road project, the key features from there is we're increasing the number of lanes from 2 to 4 with 6 lanes over the bridge. So that's that green line you can see on the map there. We're also signalising intersections at Waihoho Road with Great South Road and Kath Henry Lane. And there is a new higher bridge over the North Island main trunk line. This will also enable the Papakura to Pukauri rail line electrification and planned additional tracks in the future, meaning much faster journeys and no need to change trains through there. We're also installing walking and bike paths separated from vehicles as well to support the community there with multimodal choice. On the next slide, please. So this is the Manukau to Takaanini Access and Safety Project. So the key features of this project is safety improvements along the corridor on the green section you can see there, including signalised intersections, pedestrian crossings, realignment of that notorious Readout Road, Murphy's Road intersection, if any of you have tried to negotiate that in peak hour. We're looking at public transport improvements, including road space reallocation and road widening for bus priority lanes. And once again, the community, to help the community with the multimodal aspects, is walking and bike paths, including a new green bridge for active modes across State Highway 1 between Flatbush and the Manukau CBD. On the next slide, please. Now, the Papakura to Drury project, this is the construction that you're seeing now when you travel down the Southern Motorway. It's going to support growth in South Auckland and create more reliable transport choices. So there's actually 3 stages, of which stage 1's broken into 3. So stage 1A, which is the green. So construction commenced in 2021, and we're expecting to complete that late next year. Stage 1B1, which is the orange section, there's some early works underway at the railway bridges there, and the main construction will begin early next year and won't be completed until probably late 2027. And the black section there, stage 1B2, was consented middle of this year, and construction is looking to be commenced sort of mid next year, subject to some land acquisition, and once again it'll be completed around that late 2027. Now, stages 2 and 3, which is Drury to Bombay, is only route protection at the moment and is scheduled for lodgement in late 2023. And that's actually NLTP funded, so not part of the government funding. So next slide, the scope of this project includes improved highway access, improved resilience and capacity on the State Highway 1 between Papakura and Drury, including an additional lane in each direction. There's wide shoulders for future bus services. We're installing the shared walking and cycling path on the western side of State Highway 1 between Papakura and Drury, extending that existing path that you now run between Papakura and Takaanini interchanges. We're doing some interchange improvements at Papakura. Because the motorway's widened, we've had to redo a new southbound on-ramp and a northbound ramp improvements. There's interchange improvements at Drury, which is enabling the rail electrification and future proofing for additional railway lines, and also improved access on Great South Road to cater for the over-dimensional vehicles which need to get off the motorway to take the routes that don't have overbridges. And there's improved access across State Highway 1 generally, and improved safety and environmental features. So next slide, please. We are working with other projects in the Drury area to coordinate construction activities as much as possible. Been working there at Park Estate Local Bridge completion. We really work closely with Watercare around that. We acknowledge that Drury is going to experience significant change in the next 10 years, and there's going to be a lot of construction in the area, but it's really going to set us up for success with a great community access down there. Next slide, please. I just wanted to touch on Te Huia. It's been in the media a lot. As the regulator for rail safety, actions taken by Waka Kotahi addressed a specific identified risk in order to protect the public safety. The order that was put in place for Te Huia service has been taken in response to a situation where a commuter train carrying over 90 passengers entered the busy Auckland Metro rail network, coming within 200 metres of a collision of another passenger train with the risk of multiple serious injuries or fatalities. So this regulatory activity undertaken by Waka Kotahi is measured and targeted to the risk identified rather than a broad brush approach. So I just wanted to be clear around that, you know, as a regulator, we had to take action on the significant safety issue, and we absolutely took a measured and target approach to the risk identified. Next slide, please, and I'll hand it over to Randia, who can walk through the Northwest Rapid Transit with you.
Thanks, Steve. Kia ora koutou. Just checking that you can hear me okay?
Yeah, it's good, Randia.
Okay, perfect. Next slide, please. So the committee might recall not too long ago, I spoke to you about the interim bus works that's underway along State Highway 16 at the moment. And with that works nearing completion, we're pushing into the investigation for the long-term work. Want to get a feel for what that long-term picture actually looks like. And you know, we are all acutely aware of the growth that's occurring in the Northwest now, but will continue to actually occur into the years to come as well. And of course, we've got population and housing growth that's forecast to occur. It's therefore really, really important that improvements are made to public transport systems actually continues. So we've actually got the interim works in place now, and we're turning our minds to what does the longer term view actually look like. There was an investigation done back in 2018 that looked at this general study area, which was from Westgate through to Newton. What our study is looking to do is just broaden that out a bit more and include Brigham Creek all the way through to and including the city centre, which is the tricky bit as well. Next slide, please. So look, there is a plan. This is the blueprint for what rapid transit would look like in the future to support a growing Auckland. So it's all part of a wider strategy of actually having a connected rapid transit system. We've actually also looking at getting a lot more connected with other projects underway. So starting to work closely with the Harbour Connections project and Auckland Light Rail as well to take that sort of system view as well. So we start to make stepstones towards an Auckland-based network. Next slide, please. So look, we're definitely taking learnings from other projects and want to ensure that whatever we are coming up with in this next phase of study actually makes sense for the northwest of Auckland, but also for Auckland in general. You know, we certainly have our eye on the big picture from an RTN perspective, but we are also interested in, you know, what does logical chunking up of the entire system look like into manageable bits. So it's really for us, it's about thinking pragmatically around what's the right thing to do, what is the right size, and what's the right time to do the different parts. So even though we're looking at the bigger longer term system, we are interested in what does stageability actually look like as well. So the DBC, you know, through the analysis that we will be doing, we'll be looking at you know, what is the right mode and the alignment of that mode for the Northwest. Should it be bus-based? Should it be some form of light rail? So we are looking at a suite of things. We're not boxing ourselves into one particular avenue. We're also interested, as I mentioned, is what does stageability actually look like practically? So part of that is actually casting over a value for money lens over the work that we actually are going to be doing. So what's affordable, what's doable, but also what supports the growth that needs to occur across the Northwest, but also for Auckland as well. And we also, as I mentioned earlier, taking that system view. And so that's about not looking at a long-term public transport connection to the Northwest, which is critically important, but also thinking about what that means from a system perspective and how that supports or is supported by other rapid transit investigations currently underway. So really important to be integrated. The other thing that we are looking to do with this particular study, and this is a clear learning, and I recall at previous committee meetings, we've had a conversation about how well does Waka Kotahi work actually connect with the local network. So we've actually taken that on board, and what we're looking to do with this piece of work is not just look at that spine that I showed you, but it's actually looking at, in order for the system to be successful, we want to understand together with Auckland Transport and Auckland Council, what does the local network need to look like to be able to support true success. That'll do two things. One, obviously, allow all of our planners to have a joined up view from a system perspective, but it also will allow Auckland Transport and Auckland Council to think long term in terms of that investment planning for local network investment as well. So I'm really keen at the end of this for us to actually have a business case that gives a complete investment picture as well. We also are interested in the role that heavy rail plays in the Northwest and what is the interplay between what you're doing here and heavy rail. So the team will be looking at that a bit more closely and working closely with our key stakeholders. So we actually have a really compelling investment case that actually brings into view our key stakeholders, influences and perspectives, including mana whenua as well, who are a key part of what we're doing. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to impress upon all of you how important and how much we value the input from the Transport Infrastructure Committee. You are a key stakeholder, and it's really important that you are involved in this process to help make it as successful as possible. So this is just a very high level time frame, and we are looking to start engaging the community. We've got almost like a 3-step process at a very high level. We want to, around about August, go out to the community with a bit of a light touch, if you like, where we want to inform and understand the views from Aucklanders and people that live in the Northwest and wider as well. What's important from a travel perspective, what's important from an outcomes perspective, so that can feed into our studies. And that'll be made up of things like open days, but also online surveys to get a feel for how people are viewing long-term public transport for the Northwest. Then later this year, probably around November, but we haven't worked out the dates yet. We'll be actually wanting to share more information around the business case, the process, the options that we are looking at, and how things are starting to land in terms of what a future public transport system could look like. And then early to mid next calendar year, we are wanting to be able to then have a conversation about what that preferred option, long-term option might look like. There's just a little error on my slide I want to correct on that circle on the extreme right. That should actually be quarter 2 or 3 of 2024, not 2023. So apologies for that error. So what I'm really keen to test with the committee, either today or even separately offline, as I say, we're really interested in your input. It's a key learning for us as Waka Kotai on some of the projects that we do. So I'm interested in how we engage with you. I've got a bit of a starter there as an idea, which is we think there's probably a good opportunity to have some workshops with yourselves in between those key consultation dates. So potentially something in September, October, where we come to you in a bit of an informal workshop setting and we can talk to you a bit more detail as to where things are headed. And the timing is good just before we go out to any public consultation, and then potentially again come back for another workshop with yourselves early next year before we go out again. So look, this is just a framework. I guess the offer from us here is we want to work a lot more closely with you, and we want to take on board your views on things as well as we progress this work. Next slide, please. So also want to highlight that the choices and decisions that we've been making on this project are complex and they're very strategic in nature. And so there will be a lot of things to balance. We want to get the views of Aucklanders, absolutely, but there are a number of factors and things that we need to take into consideration to make good, sound decisions going forward. And look, I just want to be upfront as well and state that ultimate decisions, will be made and will rest with Waka Kotai as we advise central government. However, we are committed to engaging with you, Auckland Council and Auckland Transport, and bring you along the journey as well. So you're kept well informed as to how things are tracking along from our perspective. So I think that's my last slide. Yes, it is. So I'll leave that there with you, and maybe leave on the table the offer around how might we engage with you going forward, and some of the suggestions that I've made. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Randy and Steve, for those presentations today. As always, incredibly informative, and just so the scale and the variety of work that's been done around Auckland and the different components to each project, which can take a little while to actually get your head around. But when the jobs are finished, you actually see how it all ties together. And I certainly know from personal experience how beneficial this has been to to our communities north of the bridge. And thank you, Randy, for that that very kind offer in respect of the input from our committee, and I'm sure that will be readily accepted by committee members. And I know Barry is already making notes about the possibilities for workshops. I think that offer to involve us in an ongoing basis and before consultation, I think that's highly desirable, and we really appreciate that response. Well, certainly I do anyway. We have a number of questions here. First up from the South, Councillor Newman.
Oh, look, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officers. Look, there's an important consultation coming on the 14th of October, which will hopefully clarify some issues with respect to the NZ Up South Auckland project. So I had two comments and a question. Firstly, I have confidence in the State Highway 1 Papakura to Drury work that's taking place. I think that the Park State Road Bridge is great. I think that the work that's progressing in that corridor is excellent. The problem is the Manukau to Takaanini Access and Safety Project, otherwise known as the first part of Mill Road. That is just in a diabolical state given the chopping and changing from government on the commitments and lack of commitments with respect to the Mill Road corridor. My question to the officers, and it's pretty apparent that the advice from Wakatahi to government has actually been to commit to the Mill Road project, although government decided otherwise. In the earlier slide, with respect to, and I'll just bring it up here, Manukau to Takaanini Access Safety Project, and at the bottom of the visual there, you've got that particular project expiring at Cosgrove Road, and from then on it's just a grey line. How quickly can you pivot, depending on the outcome of the new GPS, to reinstate the work for route protection and acquisition for the full Mill Road corridor? I accept that you're currently having to work to what the government has committed to, but that might not be the case in a few months' time. So how quickly can that, the Mill Road corridor is not actually a State Highway 1 network corridor. It's not part of Wakatahi's road network, but you're doing the project. So how quickly can you pivot in the event that we have a different direction on that Mill Road program, so as to work to address the full corridor and not just the so-called access and safety projects that you have bundled up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just pass to Randy in a second, but just to confirm, you're absolutely right that the government decided in June 2021 not to proceed with the full lane Mill Road corridor, and asked Wakatahi to investigate options to improve safety and support that decarbonisation and housing growth in the existing corridor. So yeah, you're absolutely right, that was a government decision. I'll pass it over to Randy now to talk about the details around that.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Councillor Newman. Good question. And I think the key next step for us to go to route protection is to complete the detailed business case. And through the Supporting Growth Alliance work, we're actually kicking off the detailed business case work now in preparation for any future route protection that's required. That's not an overnight process, but we are keeping momentum on that piece of work. And also, just to state that Mill Road is still part of the long-term strategy for this part of the network, and that business case will actually highlight what are the key outcomes, outputs, and some timeframes for that as well. So the business case is the key next step, which is what we're working on right now.
Is the Mill Road, is the route protection work that you're talking about for the full corridor, or is it just for the corridor in green? Because it's a lot of people in the south regard this as disingenuous that we would be doing route protection for only part of the area, given that this is a corridor which requires conveyance from north to south, Botany, East Tamaki through to Drury.
Yeah, look, I'm referring to the full long-term corridor, councillor. So have a business case ready. So if we need to go into and are funded to go into route protection, then we have that work sitting and ready to go.
Just one other question, if I can, Chair, with respect to Te Huia. Can I understand Wakakotahi's position as a regulator? Are you only addressing the matter with respect to Te Huia, or is this now going to be an approach for all train services? I know that Te Huia is commuter, but you could say, well, the same needs to apply to freight across other parts of the network. At the moment, what it seems to me is that Te Huia is pretty well dead, and that's going to be a great inconvenience for interregional commuter rail enthusiasts, and obviously people currently coming from Hamilton are all having to basically exit at Papakura and catch buses. So how is this issue going to be resolved, because it's unsatisfactory at the moment?
Yes, thank you, councillor. So just to confirm, this prohibition notice is purely just for Te Huia. So I mentioned that it was targeted to the risk identified rather than using that broad brush approach. So some of the other services that currently operate, like the Northern Explorer service, that hasn't run red lights twice like Te Huia. And there has been a number of other events with freight, but they have not involved commuter trains. So instead of using that broad brush approach, we've used that targeted approach, as I mentioned.
Steve,
we are working with KiwiRail to ensure they're aware of our concerns, and it's KiwiRail need to answer the question around how quickly they can expedite the interventions that are required.
Steve, I'm not very reassured. I mean, if a freight train collides with another freight train or something like that, it seems to me to can also present a risk to loss of life and obviously a very serious impact on the infrastructure on that rail network. So I think, respectfully, I think that you need to have something that weighs up the risk across all of these services, not just commuter but freight as well, if that's how you're going to address this particular problem.
Yeah, no, certainly we do look at it like that. It's just that none of the other SPADs recorded involved a commuter train carrying passengers. They may have involved freight trains doing something not in accordance with the regulations, but it did not include any passenger trains.
Councillor Lee?
Thank you, gentlemen. I just have to share the concerns of Councillor Newman here. You're talking about a targeted approach in effectively banning Te Huia from the Auckland rail network, but that's not an even-handed approach. In terms of targeting Te Huia rather than freight trains, which have exactly the same safety controls as Te Huia, you're overlooking the fact that a freight train probably can do more damage if it collides with a commuter train on the Auckland network. So, to be honest with you, you say it's targeted, but it doesn't make sense, and it's certainly not even-handed. An even-handed approach for a regulator. Obviously, the targeting needs to be a lot more detailed to actually zero in on the problem. The fact of the matter is, there was never going to be a collision because that train was automatically brought to a halt by its own standard control system. So as the chief executive of KiwiRail has pointed out, so I think you need to be a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more focused in dealing with this. Obviously there is a problem, but simply banning a train for what seems a whole year and probably wrecking the possibility of regional rail is not a very smart one, I believe, by Waka Kotahi. On another matter, I want to say thank you for not parroting the nonsense that light rail is rapid transit and that you are investigating options intelligently on an international basis, particularly for the Northwest. We already have a line to the Northwest. We have stations along the Northwest corridor that are not being used, and I would certainly suggest that you do support heavy rail along the Northwest if you're serious about rapid transit. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think you can probably take that as feedback there, Steve. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Darby.
Thanks. Just, it's not my main question, Steve and Randy, but Te Huia is not prohibited from the whole network. It's prohibited beyond Papakura. Is that correct?
That is correct, Councillor.
So it's still operating. I understand the patronage has been massively, successful, but it's got a restriction north of Papakura on the network, and that's the focus area. Okay, look, can I just go to Steve? I messaged you during the week about this, and that is the Ara Tuhono Puari Wickworth. There was some media suggesting that possibly Waka Kotahi or the consortium on your behalf had overlooked doing some work or hadn't done some work. When that project was opened, was it not opened and you signalled that there was ongoing work relating to that lower section of motorway? I know when I travelled it for the first time, and it's pretty impressive, there are concrete barriers in place, and I sort of noticed those, and then remembered that you'd actually stated that there was ongoing works. There's perception that there is a new problem, but I understand by October you're due to be the job is due to be completed outright. Steve, can you just address that? And then there's a second part to the question, Steve. I've just become aware that emergency services at least St. John's have instructed their staff to not use the new road unless they're under lights. That is, if they're on a call going somewhere and that they're always at risk of getting called to a priority one, and then they'll drop that call and go to the priority one, they can't leave the motorway, they can't turn around, they can't find an exit on the 19-kilometre length, and therefore they are instructing their staff, unless they're under lights going to a priority one or going from a priority one, they are not to use that section of motorway. Are you aware of that? And has there been any consideration in designing long sections of motorway to allow at least for emergency egress, entry, exits? Two parts to that. Thanks, Steve and Randy.
Thank you, Councillor. To address your first question, so yes, when we opened the motorway last month, we did signal that there was still some work to do and that people using the road could expect to see that work continuing around the motorway for several months. We did allude to that it was work on the Puhoi on and off ramps, plus some earthworks, seasonal planting, and some final cleanup of the work areas. And we worked really hard to get the motorway open as quickly as we can. So we absolutely knew there was going to be some outstanding work to do, but we're absolutely confident that the road is safe. And as you said, people are really enjoying that experience. It's an amazing piece of road. So look, significant work has been done since that initial report was done. Look, all the information was provided to the media channels at the time. Some of them chose not to use some of that material, but at a high level, a report was produced for Waka Kotahi in response to preliminary options that had been proposed for some repairs of a landslide or to respond to a landslide. And since the date of that report, the NX2, which you operate and maintain that part of the motorway, has developed a design solution that has now been implemented. And the work in that location is ongoing. The concrete barriers have been put in place, as you talked about, Councillor, as a temporary traffic management plan. And that's to ensure that the landslide actually poses no risk whatsoever to the public travelling on the motorway. And the solution, once constructed in October and November this year, will certainly comply with all the works requirements. So to your second question, Councillor, I was not aware of that, but I will certainly take that up around your reference to the emergency services. We do meet with emergency services on a regular basis, and we do so prior to the opening of that motorway to make sure that we were working closely with our emergency service partners. We do have quite a few conversations, particularly with police, around the length of the motorway network where they need to turn around for emergency situations. And we're currently having that conversation at the moment around the new Penlink connection and how the police can get those turnaround bays in place to enable them to respond to emergencies quickly. So I'll take that offline, Councillor, and just look into that. Thank you for raising it with me.
Okay, yes, thank you, Steve, for those responses. Just a quick tag on to Councillor Darby's question. Certainly, a number of those cuts are very significant. But a related question just goes to the lighting or the absence of lighting. So, in the evening, is there any kind of concern or otherwise being mooted with respect of how dark big chunks of that motorway actually are? I mean, I know my eyesight's starting to go, but I drove along it and it did seem quite dark in big places. Is there anything that we should know about that, Steve?
No, not at all. So there's different levels of lighting on our motorway network. You'll notice, going through the CBD area, obviously the motorway is highly lit. When you get to the extremities of the network, such as up to Warkworth or down to Bombay area, the motorway is not lit. In fact, on the northern side, it's not lit at all. But what we do is that we increase the levels of service in terms of the reflectors, the delineations on the motorway to make sure that lanes are clearly identified during the nighttime and that the headlights are picking up those reflectors that you see on the road. So it's certainly designed to international standards and meeting the requirements of our network.
Okay, so thanks, Steve. I know Steve and Randy said they had to go in about 6 minutes' time. We've got 3 questions left. Councillor Henderson, Williamson and Hills, if you could bear that in mind, please.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'll be quick. Rita Huya, 200 metres seemed actually like not really that close. Close, too close probably, but not like it's right next to each other. Could I just really nail down firstly what happened and also why did we exclude freight? I think Councillor Lee's dead on with his questioning. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
You're muted.
Sorry,
You're
I don't
muted.
really. Yeah, thank you. I don't want to really go into the details of the incident. That would take some time to explain. But I think, I think that as a regulator for rail safety, we would not be doing our job if we didn't take swift action after an incident like this. I take on your points and I'll feed that back to the team in terms of the approach we've taken. But certainly we'd rather be explaining why we issued this order now than answering questions about why we didn't act if the service was allowed to continue operating and an accident did occur.
So follow up, just a quick follow up. Thank you, Chair. So can I then just really drill down and ask, why did we not issue the same order for freight services?
My understanding is that the SPAD events are recorded for any incidents where a train or a rail vehicle has entered a section of track without the correct approvals. So my understanding is that none of the other SPADs recorded involved a commuter train carrying passengers entering the busy Auckland Metro rail network, which could have had the potential for a collision with another passenger train.
Councillor Williamson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I just wanted to flick back to the Te Huia train issue again and just ask this, because I get so many people who talk about what an incredible success things are, and then you realise how much it's costing in terms of subsidies. Is it correct that only 3% of the operational costs of that train are met from the fares that we charge? Or is that an urban myth?
I would have to come back to you to confirm that. I don't have that information in front of me. Look, this was a pilot or a trial that was put forward, and Waka Kotahi invested in this with the government to make sure we provided choices for people travelling, especially interregional into Auckland. So I don't have those figures in front of me, but I can certainly find out for you if you wish.
Yeah, look, I do wish, because I'm fine with a subsidy, and we subsidise various things with 50% subsidy or whatever. But 3% is what I am told is how much the fares contribute to the operational cost, and 97% of it is by way of subsidy. I can make just about anything a raging success if someone else pays nearly the entire cost of it.
So
I would like those numbers, please.
yes, yeah.
This is fine. Yep.
Yep. So we've made it. Barry Potter's noted that. Thank you, Councillor Williamson. So we'll get that back to you. And finally, Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Councillor Watson, and wait till you hear about the 100% subsidy for highways, Councillor Williamson. The two comments I have, or questions, on the Northwestern, and we are receiving a bit more of an update on that. Are you going to be incorporating as much of the interim infrastructure into the future design, or will it be completely separate? Just wanted to know how much we're going to sink into something to maybe change it in a not too distant future. I've got one question after that.
Yeah, I might just answer that, Steve. Look, Councillor, thank you for the question. We're just kicking off the study now, so don't know what that's going to look like. We're talking about a long-term solution here for the Northwest, so the interim bus improvements absolutely critical and needed right now, and that's going to really support our public transport usage for the Northwest. The work that the long-term investment we're looking at is actually how do we use what we currently have to help us progress to a future state. And I think, look, without having to try and answer the question before the work is done in terms of the detail, but that staging point that I made earlier on, that's where the interim works really comes into its own, because if we are looking at some form of staging due to affordability, then it could be a bit of a mix and match between the interim works and a long-term strategy. So that's where it actually starts to be quite important in terms of the network as well.
Thank you. And very last question, maybe for Steve, that we've had lots of discussions about weeds and good new native planting, which seems to be going fantastic, but the graffiti seems to have come back and is kind of a constant issue. Is there an issue that we need to be aware of, or how can we help? If you've got the Victoria Tunnel, you've got the big, what are they called, the barriers down by Fanshawe on-ramp in St Mary's Bay and around the network, that seems to be increasing, and I'd say it's increasing because we're leaving it there. Is there a plan to really ramp up that graffiti removal that seems to be very visual across the network on the Pink Path and a few other places as well?
Thank you, Councillor. I did notice that last week myself, and I did mean to catch up with the team to understand what the issue was there. I'll put that on my list to get that update and send you an email.
those have been there a couple of months now. So just that'd be cool. That could be escalated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve and Randy. There is the motion to receive the update from Wakatahi, moved by Councillor Fletcher, seconded by Councillor Walker. There is an opportunity for brief comment. Councillor Ensign.
Thanks, Chair. Really brief. The Tahuya thing, I'm still a little bit hung up on it, despite the questions, because if we're talking about a human error, then we can handle that situation through, employment practices and whatnot. If it's a systems issue, then there would be no reason why Tahuya specifically would be singled out over any other type of train. So I'm still not getting it. I don't know if it's just me, but it doesn't seem to kind of be adding up for me. And I'm just very interested to hear about maybe a bit more at maybe a later date at the explanation of that, because that'd be really interesting. We want to promote things like Tahuya. So to have it singled out, we need a good reason for it. The other thing I want to do just briefly is note the fantastic work in finding a permanent solution to the northwestern public transport problem. Just want to shout out to Wakatahi in that, the great work that you're doing to link those population centres in Te Atatu, Massey, Westgate, all those feeder suburbs that have absolutely zero until the interim busway, which is still not adequate, will be online soon. So, they desperately need solutions there. I'm really glad that you guys are on the case. So thanks for that.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. I just want to echo those sentiments, Steve, Randy. We really appreciate the way you put yourselves out here. We front up every month, and particularly for the emerging relationship and the willingness to involve the council where previously we weren't. And certainly for our committee, this kind of monthly catch up and feedback is really helpful to these really substantive projects that are occurring right across the region, and which increasingly are having a local impact too. And you're obviously taking the lead there also in relations with Auckland Transport. So thanks very much. We really appreciate it. It's been moved, seconded. All those favours, please say aye. Aye. Against? No. Okay, thank you. For one final item before the lunch break, folks.
Thank you, Chair.
Should hopefully
Thank you.